The wind cut across the dry plains like a restless spirit, carrying the scent of sagebrush and smoke from distant fires. She stood at the edge of the canyon, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the rough bark of a dying cottonwood. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and longing, and the twilight painted her face in shadows that seemed older than the land itself. She whispered, barely audible even to herself, "I am not enough to be your wife." A lone hawk circled overhead, its shadow dancing across the rocky ground, and she felt the weight of every scar she bore, faded lines on her arms. The mark on her cheek, the memory that lingered beneath her skin. She had tried to hide them, to forget the pain that carved its story into her flesh, but it always followed her. The Apache warrior watched her from the edge of the trees, his dark eyes steady and unyielding. He had seen many souls broken by the harshness of the West, yet there was something in her vulnerability that drew him closer, that whispered of strength hidden beneath fear. He stepped forward, the sound of his moccasins muffled by the dry grass. His presence was quiet, yet impossible to ignore, a calm certainty in a world that demanded vigilance at every turn. His name was Red Hawk, and the wind seemed to answer to his movements, bending the tall prairie grass as if bowing to an unspoken command. He had fought in battles that scarred both body and soul, yet he carried a gentleness reserved for those rare moments when the world paused and allowed him to see something worth protecting. Her name was Lark, and though she appeared fragile, she had endured tragedies that had hardened her heart against hope. She had lived through winters so cold they seemed to freeze the air itself, watched families torn apart by greed and cruelty, and faced men whose promises were as hollow as the rattlesnake pits dotting the mesas. Yet in Red Hawk's gaze she felt something she had not dared to believe in a long time, a warmth that promised understanding without judgment, and perhaps a chance at redemption. They had met under strange circumstances, a meeting that neither could forget. Lark had been fleeing from a past she could not escape, and Red Hawk had stumbled upon her when she had almost given up. Their first encounter had been tense, the air thick with suspicion and fear. But he had offered her something she could not name at the time, a hand extended not for conquest, but for safety. She had hesitated, her body ready to run, yet some instinct told her to trust him, even as the world screamed against it. The evening shadows lengthened, and the horizon burned with the last embers of the setting sun. Lark's voice faltered as she spoke again, softer this time, almost like a prayer. "I am not enough." The words hung between them, fragile and heavy, like the silence after a storm. Red Hawk did not speak, but he moved closer, bridging the space between fear and courage. When he reached her, he did not touch her gently or offer platitudes. Instead, he pressed his lips to the scars she had so long despised, the marks that told the story of every battle she had fought to survive. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from the raw honesty of the gesture. He kissed the pain she carried, and for the first time, she felt it being honored rather than hidden. His touch was not about desire or conquest, it was an acknowledgement, a silent vow that her worth was never measured by perfection, but by survival, by the courage to keep moving forward. Lark's breath caught, and she wanted to pull away, yet her body remained rooted in place, caught between disbelief and hope. Red Hawk's hands were steady on her shoulders, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble that matched the earth beneath their feet. "You are more than the world tells you, Lark, more than the pain, more than the fear. I see you." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that settled deep in her chest. For so long, she had believed her scars made her unworthy, that love and loyalty were reserved for the untouched and unbroken. But here, on the edge of the canyon, with the wind whispering through the trees and the earth beneath them, solid and true, she felt the possibility of something she had almost forgotten belonging. Yet even as the moment stretched, unspoken fears lingered in the space between them. Lark had secrets, dark corners of her life she had never dared to share, shadows that could shatter the fragile trust budding between them. Red Hawk sensed it, of course, but he did not shy away. His past had taught him the strength of patience and the necessity of facing truths, no matter how jagged or uncomfortable. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy. Love, like the land they traversed, required endurance, and he was ready to endure it if she was willing to take the first step. The wind shifted, carrying a faint smell of smoke from a distant settlement. Somewhere out there, danger waited, the kind that had already taken so much from both of them in different ways. Lark's heart tightened, a warning she could not ignore, yet she could not leave this place either. Something in Red Hawk's eyes assured her that running was not the answer. Perhaps it never was. The Apache warrior had seen the world in its cruelest forms and yet remained unbroken, and in that reflection, Lark caught a glimpse of the woman she could become, strong, fearless, and unapologetically herself. The canyon walls seemed to lean closer, listening to their unspoken words. Shadows flickered across the ground, and Lark felt the pulse of the land beneath her feet, ancient and enduring. Every tree, every stone, seemed to recognize the fragility of the moment and the significance of the choice before her. To trust was to risk, but to remain alone was to surrender. She had come to the edge of despair so many times before, yet here at this precise moment, she felt the weight of her past loosen slightly, as if it might be possible to carry it without being crushed. Red Hawk's hand brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, gentle but deliberate. His eyes searched hers, not for the scars, but for the courage behind them. And in that gaze, Lark realized something she had not allowed herself to feel for a long time. Perhaps she was enough, not perfect, not unscathed, but enough to stand in the light. To face the uncertainty of what lay ahead, the question was whether she could believe it. A sudden cry rang out from the valley below, sharp and desperate. Lark flinched, her body tense, the hard-earned calm of the evening shattered. Red Hawk's grip tightened ever so slightly, grounding her. He turned toward the sound, his senses alert, yet his focus never left her. There were dangers here, threats that would not wait for understanding or love. And still he did not let go, as if to say without words, "We face this together, whatever comes." The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in a deep twilight where shadows merged with the fading light. Lark felt the heat of fear and hope intertwining, a tension that refused to be settled. The scars on her body, the fears in her heart, the unspoken past, all of it pressed against her in the quiet of the desert evening. Red Hawk kissed her forehead this time, not the scars, promise rather than acknowledgement, and whispered softly, "We begin here." And in that instant, as the wind stirred and the canyon held its breath, Lark realized that nothing had truly begun yet. The night would bring choices, challenges, and revelations she could not yet imagine. But perhaps for the first time, she would not face them alone. Yet the unknown waited like a predator in the darkness, and the air carried a warning. The past does not rest easily, and love, even when tender and true, does not come without its trials. The stars began to emerge, sharp and cold in the indigo sky. Lark's hand found Red Hawk's, fingers brushing in a tentative grip that spoke volumes. In the silence between them, the canyon whispered a story older than any one, of survival, of loss, and of courage. And though she tried to hold on to certainty, she knew that the moment would not last. Shadows were moving, both seen and unseen, and what lay ahead could change everything. Yet even with the fear pressing at her chest, she felt a flicker of something new, something dangerous, beautiful, and alive. She was not enough in the way the world defined, perhaps. But here, with Red Hawk at her side, her scars kissed, and her heart uneasy, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was enough in the ways that truly mattered. And as the wind howled through the canyon, carrying the echoes of the past and the promise of tomorrow, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the choice she would have to make. The canyon seemed to stretch endlessly beneath the first stars, a labyrinth of shadows and hidden trails. Lark's fingers remained entwined with Red Hawk's, though the grip was more for grounding than comfort. She could feel her heart hammering, not just from fear, but from the memory of the cry that had shattered the fragile peace. Somewhere in the valley, someone was calling for help, or issuing a warning, and instinct told her it was not the kind of danger that could be ignored. Red Hawk's eyes scanned the horizon, dark and sharp as flint, learned to read the land like a map written in wind and stone. Every ridge, every tree, every bend of the river carried a story if you knew how to look. He crouched slightly, listening to the faint rustle of bushes, the occasional shift of rocks, and the distant sound of hooves on hard ground. "They are close," he murmured, and Lark felt the weight of the words. Not all dangers came quietly. Some sought to take what they could without mercy. Her mind wandered to the weeks before she had arrived at this canyon, to the life she had fled. Her father, a stern man with hands that could both protect and punish, had never understood her curiosity, her need to see beyond the small, dusty town she had grown up in. He had spoken often of survival, of keeping one's place, but Lark had always sensed a larger world outside the horizon, one that whispered of freedom, of choice. It was a lesson she had learned. Late survival often demanded more than courage. It demanded cunning, patience, and sometimes sacrifice. Her mother had died when Lark was still young, leaving her with only fragments of warmth and the memory of a lullaby hummed under the faint glow of candlelight. The lullaby had been soft, almost fragile, and it reminded her of what she had lost. She had tried to forget the tears and the nights she had spent alone, but each scar on her body told the story her lips could not. Some were the marks of childhood accidents, others born from the cruelty of men who thought her silence meant weakness. And yet here she stood, in the shadow of a warrior who saw her whole, not just the broken pieces. Red Hawk moved silently to the edge of the canyon and gestured for Lark to follow. "The wind carries more than echoes," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "It carries intentions. We need to be ready." He led her along a narrow path, barely visible beneath the dim glow of the stars, the rocks crunching softly beneath their feet. Every step was deliberate, careful, and measured. Lark noticed how attuned he was to the land, how his senses seemed to stretch beyond the ordinary. She had seen men in town claim bravery, but it had always been loud, clumsy, and desperate. Red Hawk's bravery was quiet, deliberate, and terrifying in its precision. As they moved deeper into the canyon, Lark began to understand why the Apache warrior had been drawn to this place. It was wild and unforgiving, a land that demanded respect. The cliffs rose sharply on either side, jagged and unyielding, and the wind whistled through narrow passages like the breath of unseen spirits. Red Hawk stopped at a ledge that overlooked a hidden creek. The water shimmered faintly in the starlight, but even here, danger lingered. Tracks were visible along the muddy bank's horseprints, footprints, and something else she could not name.
Ow.
Her stomach twisted. Whoever or whatever had passed this way was still nearby. Lark thought of the townspeople she had left behind, of the small home she had tried to call her own. She had been running from betrayal, from lies whispered behind closed doors, and from men who had promised protection only to bring pain. The world outside her father's yard had been cruel, but the wilderness had been more honest. It had no need for pretense. It simply existed, and you'd either adapted or perished. Red Hawk had adapted in ways she could not yet comprehend. His scars told of battles she could not imagine, yet his eyes held a softness reserved for those rare moments when trust could exist. "Do you trust me?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. The question was not casual. It hung in the night air, sharp and demanding. Lark hesitated. Trust had been a dangerous word in her life, one that had led her into pain more than once. And yet something in Red Hawk's presence made her want to say yes, even if the world outside this canyon had taught her otherwise. I want to," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But I don't know if I can." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her confession. "Trust is not given lightly," he said. "It is earned, and sometimes it is found when you least expect it. But it is worth the risk." His gaze softened, and for a moment, the tension in Lark's chest eased. She could almost imagine a life beyond fear, a life where her scars were not chains but proof of endurance. The sound came again, a crack of wood, a sudden snap from the underbrush. Red Hawk stiffened, muscles coiling like a spring. Lark clutched his arm instinctively, heart pounding. "Stay behind me," he ordered, and she obeyed, though her mind raced with questions. Who was out there? A band of marauders? Hunters seeking to claim what they did not understand? Or was it something else, more dangerous, waiting patiently in the dark? Red Hawk signaled for silence, moving closer to the source of the sound. Lark followed, barely breathing, every nerve on edge. The canyon seemed alive, each shadow a potential threat, every whisper of wind a secret. And yet even amidst the fear, she felt a strange sense of exhilaration, a reminder that life was still unfolding. She was still capable of choosing her own path. They came to a small clearing where the moonlight barely reached the ground. Red Hawk knelt, inspecting the tracks more closely. Lark peered over his shoulder, trying to make sense of the markings. They were not random, she realized. Whoever had passed this way was careful, deliberate, and trained. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. This was not a simple threat. This was someone who understood strategy, someone who could anticipate their moves. Red Hawk's hand brushed her shoulder again, grounding her. "We are not alone," he said simply, but his eyes betrayed the gravity of the situation. Lark swallowed hard. Her past had taught her that danger often arrived without warning, but it had never come with this quiet, calculating presence. It was the kind that could change everything in a heartbeat. She thought again of her scars, of the whispered words she had spoken in the canyon's shadow. "I am not enough." And yet Red Hawk had kissed those scars as if they were sacred. Perhaps they were. Perhaps the very things that made her fear rejection were what made her strong. And yet, strength alone did not guarantee safety, and the creeping shadows of the canyon reminded her that survival would require more than courage. A sudden gust of wind carried a faint sound of voices, low and deliberate, too far to be just chance travelers. Red Hawk's hand moved to the knife at his belt, and Lark felt a pang of fear mixed with anticipation. The unknown stretched before them, and she realized that whatever was coming would not wait for them to be ready. It would test everything: trust, courage, and the fragile bond that was forming between them. She glanced at Red Hawk, whose dark eyes seemed to pierce the night itself. "Are we ready for this?" she asked, voice trembling slightly, though her body stood taller than she felt. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the tracks, the shadows, the canyon walls, as if reading a story only he could decipher. Then he nodded, slowly, decisively. "We do not have a choice," he said, "but we face it together. That is all the strength we need." The canyon seemed to listen, the wind pausing for a heartbeat as if acknowledging the truth in his words. And Lark felt a strange mixture of fear and determination rise within her. The night held secrets, some old as the mountains, others born of men who would not honor the land or the lives it protected. Yet for the first time in a long while, she felt she could face them not alone, but with someone who saw her whole. Still, the uncertainty remained tangible and oppressive. Whoever or whatever was out there was moving, waiting, calculating. Fuck! Tightened her grip on Red Hawk's arm, and he responded with a subtle squeeze. Together, they stepped forward, the canyon swallowing them in its shadowed corridors, carrying them toward danger, revelation, and the mysteries that refused to be named. The night was far from over, and the first trials of trust, courage, and survival had only just begun. The canyon held its secrets close, and the deeper Lark and Red Hawk went, the more the shadows seemed to twist around them. The wind carried whispers she could not decipher, voices lost between the rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of the creek. Every step was measured, yet she felt the weight of eyes upon them, unseen but unmistakably present. Her body tensed with anticipation, and she knew instinctively that this was no ordinary threat. Red Hawk paused at the edge of a small rise, his eyes narrowing. "We are being watched," he said softly, barely above a whisper, but the gravity in his tone made her freeze. Lark strained to hear beyond the gentle rush of water and the sighing of the wind. Somewhere down in the shadows, movement stirred, was subtle, deliberate, as if the watcher knew exactly how to avoid detection yet left a trace. A thread to follow if you had the eyes to see it. Lark swallowed hard, feeling the chill of the night press into her bones. Her mind drifted to the life she had left behind, to the small town where gossip moved faster than truth and secrets were currency. There had been men who had made promises that shattered under the first weight of hardship, and women who had vanished into silence, leaving questions that never found answers. She had tried to outrun all of it, but she realized now that the past was not a place you could leave behind entirely. It followed, patient and relentless, much like the shadow now tracking them through the canyon. Red Hawk moved without sound, each step measured and confident.
Lark followed.
But her pulse raced, mind spinning with possibilities. The canyon seemed alive, each tree, rock, and shadow conspiring to test their resolve. Red Hawk's hand brushed hers for a fleeting moment, a silent reminder that she was not alone. Yet the touch did nothing to quiet the tension coiling within her. "We must be careful," he said, eyes scanning the darkness. "They do not make mistakes easily. Whoever watches us has reason, and they will act when the time is right." The words were meant to reassure, but instead they stirred more questions. Who was watching? Why had they chosen this place to follow them? And what would happen if they were cornered before understanding the intentions of their pursuers? Lark thought of her scars, the whispered words she had spoken in a moment of vulnerability. She had believed herself unworthy, but in that belief lay a strength forged by survival. Now that strength would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. Red Hawk crouched beside a fallen log, peering down into the shadows below. Lark followed, trying to make sense of the shapes moving between moonlit patches and darkness. She saw figures 3, maybe 4, wearing long coats and wide-brimmed hats that blended into the night. They carried rifles, and the way they moved suggested familiarity with the land, a knowledge that made her stomach knot. These were not travelers lost in the wilderness. These were hunters, and their prey could very well be her. "Do you know them?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Red Hawk shook his head. "No, but we will learn soon enough. Watch carefully, and remember our advantage is the land itself." He reached into his satchel and drew a small bundle, laying out flints and a few strips of dried meat. "If we are forced into confrontation, we must be ready for any outcome." And Lark, his gaze met hers, dark and steady. "Do not underestimate yourself. You are more capable than you believe." She felt a mixture of fear and gratitude. His words grounded her, but they did not erase the danger pressing in. She remembered the nights spent hiding in the woods near her home, dodging men who had sought to claim her silence, to make her small and powerless. She had survived then, and she could survive now, but the stakes were higher, and Red Hawk's presence, while comforting, reminded her that she could not rely on anyone else entirely. The figures below shifted again, and one of them raised a hand. Lark's breath caught. She could see the glint of metal under the moonlight. The subtle movements that suggested they were communicating silently, coordinated in a way that left little room for error. Red Hawk's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for her to move further along the ridge. They circled quietly, each step deliberate, their senses straining to catch even the faintest sound that might reveal intent. As they moved, Lark thought of the people she had left behind in town, the ones who had whispered lies and watched her struggle. She wondered if they were now part of this, if the shadow of her past had reached out across the wilderness to follow her. And then another thought struck her harder. Perhaps this danger was not about her alone, but about something Red Hawk carried. Something in his past that had followed him as relentlessly as she had been followed before. They stopped at the edge of a narrow ravine, where the creek split around a small island of rock. Red Hawk gestured for silence, crouching low and studying the water. The moonlight revealed faint footprints in the mud fresh, and leading both upstream and downstream. Lark bent down, tracing the prints with her fingers. They were human, clearly, but the spacing and depth suggested someone strong, capable, and deliberate. The thought sent another shiver through her, reminding her that the night was full of unknowns, and the canyon would not wait for them to prepare. Suddenly, a soft whistle cut through the air, the kind used to signal across distances without drawing immediate attention. Lark froze. Red Hawk's eyes locked on the shadows below. "They know we are here," he said quietly. "We must move. Now." He grabbed her hand, and they slipped along the ridge, silent as the night itself, hearts pounding in time with the distant creek. As they moved, Lark felt a sense of urgency she had not felt in years. Every instinct screamed that they were being hunted, that the shadows behind them were closing, and that one misstep could mean disaster. Yet even in that fear, she felt a strange exhilaration, a reminder that life was not meant to be lived in hiding. That courage was found in the moments when the world pressed hardest against you. They reached a narrow bend where the creek widened, and Red Hawk crouched, scanning the water. Lark followed, and together they noticed something unusual, a small raft tethered to a tree, almost invisible in the moonlight. Its presence suggested planning, foresight, a trail left deliberately for them to find. Red Hawk's lips pressed into a thin line. "They want us to follow," he said, "or they want us to fall into a trap. Either way, we must be careful." Lark glanced at him, heart racing. "Do we take it?" Red Hawk shook his head. "We watch first. Patience is our ally tonight. Rushing will only give them the advantage." He knelt closer to her, lowering his voice. "I need you to remember one thing, Lark. Fear is natural, but it cannot control us. The night is dark, yes, but it is not stronger than our will. We must stay aware, stay together, and wait for the right moment." She nodded, trying to steady her breath. The creek gurgled softly, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the faint trace of smoke from a fire somewhere upstream. Her mind raced with questions. Who were these hunters? What did they want? And why now, after all she had survived, did danger feel so close, so immediate, and so personal? Red Hawk crouched beside her, tracing the raft with a stick. The world does not often give second chances, he said quietly. Tonight we may be granted one, but we must choose carefully how to use it. Lark's thoughts flicked to her scars, the whispered words that had started this journey. She had believed herself unworthy, yet here she was, facing an unknown enemy with a man who had seen both darkness and resilience. Perhaps her worth was not defined by what she had lost or endured, but by how she faced the trials still ahead. The trials were coming faster than she could imagine. A sudden rustle from upstream caught their attention. Shadows moved, more deliberate than the last, closer than they had expected. Lark felt her heart seize. Red Hawk's hand tightened on hers, and she knew, without words, that the moment of choice had arrived. They would need every ounce of courage, every scrap of wit, and every bond of trust they had forged to survive what was coming. The canyon seemed to lean in, holding its breath, the night itself waiting for the first move. And Lark realized that nothing would ever be the same after this. The past, the scars, the fears, they were all part of what would determine their fate. But for now, the future was a question mark suspended over the creek, the raft, and the shadows moving in the dark. And in that question lay the tension of what was to come, the thrill of danger, and the knowledge that the night held truths neither of them was ready to uncover. The night thickened around them, swallowing the canyon in a heavy, oppressive darkness. Lark's breath came shallow and quick, every sense straining to catch the smallest hint of movement. The creek whispered beside them, a gentle sound that seemed almost cruel in its calm, knowing the danger closing in. Red Hawk crouched beside her, his body coiled like a spring, eyes scanning the shadows with unblinking precision. Every fiber of him was attuned to the land, to the threat, to her presence beside him. Lark tightened her grip on his arm, knuckles white, and felt the chill of fear wrap around her chest. She had been brave before, had faced hardships she never wanted to remember, but this was different. This was immediate, real, and inescapable. She glanced at Red Hawk's face, half hidden in shadow, and saw the same tension mirrored there. His jaw was tight, and the faint lines around his eyes deepened under the moonlight. He had seen death, betrayal, and violence. Yet the careful caution he displayed now made it clear that the enemy they faced was unlike anything trivial. A soft splash from upstream made them freeze. Lark's pulse hit a frantic rhythm, and she pressed herself closer to Red Hawk. They could not see who or what had moved in the water, but the trail was unmistakable. Someone was testing them, gauging their reactions. Red Hawk's lips moved in a silent count, a rhythm of patience and calculation, and then he made his decision. "We follow," he whispered, voice barely carrying, yet firm with command. Quietly, "Every step matters." Lark nodded, though her legs shook with tension. They crept along the edge of the creek, shadows clinging to them like silk. The raft still bobbed gently in the water, tethered to a tree as though awaiting a choice. But the enemy's presence was heavier now, pressing down through the canyon like an invisible weight. Lark's imagination painted shapes in the dark, threats that might be real or might be tricks of the night. She forced herself to breathe, to keep pace, to trust Red Hawk's judgment. The sound of voices reached them, low and guttural, carried on the wind in a way that made Lark's skin prickle. The figures from before were moving again, closer than expected. They spoke in code, a sequence of whispers and gestures, and Lark realized the enemy had been more prepared than she had imagined. Red Hawk crouched lower, dragging her down behind a boulder that offered partial cover. She huddled against the cool stone, heart hammering, and felt his presence steady her. "They will split if they find the raft empty," Red Hawk said softly, scanning the water. "We can use that. But we cannot rush." One mistake, and his words ended unspoken, but the implication was clear. Survival demanded patience, cunning, and nerves as sharp as the blades at their belts. She had always thought bravery was loud, visible. She was learning that real courage sometimes whispered in the dark. A sudden movement caught her eye, something glinting in the moonlight along the riverbank. Lark squinted, straining to see. It was a knife, partially buried in mud, marking a path she could barely make out. Red Hawk followed her gaze, eyes narrowing. "They are laying traps," he murmured. The raft was bait. "The knife marks are signals, either warnings or instructions. We have to interpret carefully, or we risk everything." Lark's pulse surged. Her mind flicked to the life she had left behind, to the town that had never understood her, to the men who had sought to control her with lies and fear. And yet, beside Red Hawk, she felt a flicker of possibility, a chance to confront danger on her terms. With someone who could see her for more than the scars she carried. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. They moved cautiously, following the subtle signs the enemy had left, every shadow a potential ambush. Red Hawk's hand brushed hers occasionally, a reminder that they were not alone in this. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her, if he saw the fear, the scars, or the strength she had barely allowed herself to believe in. And yet, despite the tension and uncertainty, a thread of hope wove through her, fragile but persistent. The creek widened, and the raft came into view again, tethered loosely, swaying as though inviting them forward. Red Hawk crouched beside it, examining the rope and the surrounding terrain. Lark held her breath. This was the moment they had been maneuvering toward, the choice between action and patience, between risk and caution. One wrong move could mean capture, injury, or worse. The enemy was watching, calculating, and the canyon itself seemed to lean closer, holding its breath in anticipation. Red Hawk's eyes met hers, dark and steady. "You must be ready," he said. "If we cross now, there may be no turning back until we know what waits ahead. Are you ready?" Lark swallowed, feeling the fear and excitement surge together. "I am," she whispered, though her voice trembled. He nodded once, and they stepped onto the raft. The water rocked slightly under their weight, and the sound of the creek seemed louder in the sudden stillness. Lark's fingers gripped the edge, knuckles white, as Red Hawk pushed them quietly into the current. The raft drifted forward, small but steady, carrying them toward the unknown. Each second stretched, each movement weighted with consequence. Upstream, a shadow shifted, and Lark caught the glint of a rifle barrel. Her breath caught, and she froze. Red Hawk reacted instantly, crouching low, positioning himself between her and the threat. The water carried the reflection of the moon, and for a moment the night seemed suspended in time, every element sharp and dangerous. Lark felt the pulse of adrenaline surge through her, her senses heightened to every sound, every movement. The voices were closer now, carried over the water.
Ow.
They were speaking again, low and controlled, signaling to each other. Lark realized with a jolt that the enemy was not just pursuing, they were orchestrating, directing the night itself to trap them. Her mind raced through possibilities. Fight, flee, hide. Every option was risky, every choice a potential mistake. Red Hawk leaned close, whispering, "Trust your instincts, Lark. Watch for patterns. They cannot anticipate what we cannot show." She nodded, her eyes scanning the water and the banks, searching for the rhythm in their movements. The shadows shifted again, and she saw a slight hesitation in the enemy's steps, a pattern in how they signaled. Her pulse quickened as she shared the realization with Red Hawk. He gave the faintest nod, acknowledging the insight, and together they prepared to act. The raft drifted closer to a narrow passage between rocks, barely wide enough for it to pass. Lark could feel the current picking up, pushing them forward. Red Hawk adjusted their balance, his hands firm on the raft's edges. The enemy's movements became more frantic, less coordinated, sensing that the moment of confrontation was near. Lark's stomach twisted with anticipation, every instinct screaming that the night's climax was approaching. Suddenly, a shout echoed from downstream, piercing the quiet. The enemy had realized their mistake, or at least detected movement, and they began to converge. Lark's breath caught. Red Hawk's expression was a mixture of determination and caution. "Hold steady," he said. "The moment is now." The canyon seemed to tighten around them, cliffs pressing close, shadows falling sharp and jagged. The creek surged, carrying them toward the unknown, every second brimming with tension. Lark's mind raced with thoughts of survival, trust, and the courage she had barely begun to understand. She knew the night could end in disaster, perhaps in revelation, a test of everything she and Red Hawk had learned to rely upon. Her fingers brushed the edge of the raft again, grounding herself in the moment. Red Hawk's eyes met hers one last time before they plunged into the narrow pass, moving fast, the enemy closing in on either side. The wind whistled like a chorus of unseen voices, and Lark felt the surge of fear, excitement, and anticipation wash over her.
Ow.
This was at the turning point. The moment where courage and cunning would be tested against shadows that threatened to consume them. And yet, amidst the fear, she felt something else, a fragile, flickering certainty that she was not alone. That Red Hawk's presence beside her gave her a strength she could not summon alone. The night held its breath, the canyon waited, and the creek carried them forward toward a confrontation that would demand everything they had, every ounce of trust, every scar, every lesson learned in a world that had never given them safety freely. The shadows converged, the creek's current pushed them forward, and the canyon seemed to echo the heartbeat of the night itself. Lark gripped the raft, gripping Red Hawk's presence as tightly as the edge beneath her, and realized that the moment before them was more than danger. It was the threshold between fear and possibility, between the past that had hunted her and the future she had barely dared to imagine. The enemy's silhouettes moved closer, the night thick with anticipation. Every instinct screamed that action was required, yet patience was their only ally. The raft surged, the water hissed against the rocks, and Lark's breath caught. The night was poised on the edge of revelation, the climax waiting just beyond the next bend. The tension stretched taut, every shadow a question, every sound a warning. And in that suspended moment, Lark felt the weight of her scars, her past, and her fear settle into something heavier, something alive. She was not alone, and yet the unknown pressed in from every side. The canyon held its breath, the water carried them forward, and the night whispered a promised danger, yes, but also the possibility that courage and trust might yet prevail. The creek roared against the narrow rocks, tossing the raft like a leaf in a storm, yet Red Hawk held steady, his hands gripping the edges as he guided them through the treacherous passage. Lark clung beside him, breath shallow, heart hammering with every surge of the water. The shadows of the enemy flickered along the canyon walls, shapes moving swiftly, but they were too late. Red Hawk's knowledge of the land, every bend and hidden channel, gave them the advantage. He leaned low, murmuring directions that Lark followed instinctively, and for the first time that night she felt a spark of hope ignite among the fear. The first enemy figure appeared on the bank, attempting to cut them off. Lark's pulse quickened, but Red Hawk was ready. With a swift motion, he grabbed a fallen branch, swinging it to push the attacker back. The man stumbled, lost balance, and the current carried him past their path. Lark's eyes widened, but there was no time to dwell on fear. More shapes emerged from the shadows, but Red Hawk remained calm, coiling the raft, shifting its direction, and using the water to their advantage. Every movement was precise, a dance between survival and strategy. She realized in that moment how much she had learned from him, not just courage, but timing, patience, and the understanding that fear could be a guide if it was controlled rather than allowed to dominate. The raft jostled violently, splashing water over their clothes, soaking them to the bone, yet she clung to Red Hawk, feeling a connection deeper than words could capture. They were surviving together, trusting one another, and in that trust, she felt her own scars become less a mark of weakness and more a testament to endurance. The final bend approached, a sharp curve where the canyon walls narrowed, forcing the enemy to crowd together if they wanted to continue pursuit. Red Hawk whispered urgently, "Hold tight, Lark. This is the last stretch. One more push, and we are beyond them." Her hands gripped the raft, knuckles white, and she nodded. The current surged with sudden force, throwing them against the jagged rocks. And Lark cried out, fear and adrenaline blending into one sharp note. Red Hawk's arm shot out, steadying them both, his focus unbroken. They emerged from the narrow bend, and the canyon opened into a small clearing where the moonlight bathed the water in silver. The enemy paused, realizing they had been outmaneuvered. Red Hawk pulled the raft to a small bank, and Lark leaped onto solid ground, knees trembling but body alive with relief. Red Hawk followed, scanning the canyon one last time to ensure no pursuers remained. The creek babbled gently beside them, the danger finally receding like a tide retreating from the shore. Lark sank to the ground, breathing hard, heart pounding with exhilaration and fear now mixed with relief. She looked at Red Hawk, drenched and wild-eyed, and something unspoken passed between them. This night had tested them in every way: their courage, their instincts, their trust stand. They had survived together. For the first time, she felt a measure of pride in herself, in her resilience, and in the bond that had formed through every trial. Red Hawk knelt beside her, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "You did well," he said simply, and Lark felt the warmth in his voice wrap around her like a shield. "More than well, you survived. You faced your fear, and you trusted." She smiled, small and tentative, a weight lifting from her chest. The scars she had feared would mark her as unworthy suddenly felt like a story of endurance, recognized and honored by the one who truly mattered. I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. "I've always been afraid of failing, of not being enough, but—" Her voice faltered, and Red Hawk's hand found hers, firm and steady. "But now?" he prompted, eyes searching hers. "Now." She took a deep breath, letting the weight of the night settle. "I feel like I am enough. Maybe not perfect, maybe still scared, but enough to stand here with you and face whatever comes next." Red Hawk nodded, a faint smile breaking through his serious demeanor. And in that moment, the tension that had shadowed them all night lifted, replaced by something fragile but powerful: hope. The first light of dawn crept over the canyon rim, painting the rocks in soft gold and amber. Lark stood, stretching her stiff limbs, and watched the sunlight touch the creek, the land, and the place where they had fought for survival. The world seemed suddenly larger, expansive, and alive with possibility. Red Hawk joined her, quiet but present, and together they took in the beauty of the morning. It was a world that had threatened them moments ago, yet now felt full of promise, reminding them that even in the harshest places life could bloom. Red Hawk spoke softly, almost to himself. "The canyon teaches the same lesson every day. Fear is real. Danger is real. But courage can be found if you know where to look." Lark's eyes met his, and she understood. The lessons of the night had not been just about surviving the enemy, but about trusting in herself, in him, and in the choices that courage demanded. They began to walk along the creek toward the open plains, the night's trials behind them, but the journey still ahead. Lark noticed the small details she had never seen before: the way the sun sparkled on the water, the scent of wild sage in the morning air, the songs of unseen birds beginning their day. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of belonging, as if the land itself welcomed her presence. Red Hawk glanced at her, eyes softening. "See, Lark, the world can be cruel and unyielding, but it can also be generous, if you have the courage to face it." She nodded, letting the words sink in, feeling the scars on her body and the fears in her heart lose their sharp edges. They were not erased, but they no longer defined her entirely. She had faced the night, faced the enemy, and discovered strength she had doubted existed. As they reached the edge of the canyon, the plains stretched before them, wide and open, touched with the morning light. Lark felt the wind on her face, the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, and the presence of Red Hawk beside her. She realized that survival had brought more than safety; it had brought connection, trust, and the knowledge that even the most wounded could find love, courage, and hope. Red Hawk's hand found hers again, fingers intertwining. She squeezed his hand, a silent promise that she would face whatever came next with him. Their pasts, filled with scars, betrayals, and trials, had led them to this moment. And while the world would continue to challenge them, they had found a bond strong enough to withstand it. The morning stretched before them like a canvas full of possibilities and unspoken adventures. Lark inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of fear lift from her chest. She had survived the canyon, survived the night, and had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it. And she had learned, most importantly, that she was not alone. Red Hawk squeezed her hand once more. "The world is wide, Lark. We will face it together. Whatever comes, we are ready." She smiled, feeling the warmth of hope fill her chest, the scars on her skin, and the memories of fear tempered by the strength of what they had endured. For the first time, she believed in herself, in him, and in the life they could build beyond the canyon's shadows. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of sage, earth, and possibility. The canyon behind them was quiet now, its dangers receding with the night. Lark took a final glance over her shoulder, honoring the trials and lessons that had brought her to this point. The scars on her body were no longer just reminders of pain. They were symbols of resilience, courage, and survival. Red Hawk walked beside her, silent but steady. And together, they stepped onto the open plains, leaving the night and its shadows behind. The sun rose higher, casting long golden rays across the land, and Lark felt something she had not felt in a long timepiece. Not perfect, but earned. Fragile, but real. The trials had not ended, but for the first time she faced the future with courage, hope, and the knowledge that she was, at last, enough. And as they walked together toward the horizon, the canyon behind them seemed to whisper its approval, the wind carrying a quiet promise: survival. Courage, love, and hope are always possible for those willing to embrace them. Lark and Red Hawk had faced the night, and together they had found the strength to begin again, ready to meet whatever the world had in store. The story of scars and whispers, of fear and courage, had reached a moment of balance. The trials had tested them, but in the end, it was not perfection that mattered. It was the willingness to face the world, to trust, and to believe in oneself. And in that belief, they had found not only survival, but the first glimmers of a life filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities.